Homelander's ending should not be judged by one question. Will he die? The real question is much darker than that. What if the worst possible ending for Homelander is not death at all? What if the true punishment is surviving long enough to lose the one thing he has built his entire identity around? Power. Because for a man like Homelander, dying in battle could still feel glorious. But living as something ordinary, living without fear, without worship, without that godlike image, that would destroy him from the inside. Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Breakdown Epic. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. With The Boys Season 5 now racing toward the finish line, one of the biggest theories hanging over the entire show is how Homelander's story finally ends. And right now, there are a few major possibilities on the board. He could die, he could become unstoppable, he could lose his powers completely, or the show could do something even crueler and leave him alive in a state he cannot emotionally survive. So today, we're breaking down the strongest possibilities for Homelander's ending, why the comic version probably isn't happening, and what fate would actually fit this character best. Let's start with the comics, because that ending still matters even if the show has clearly gone in another direction. In the source material, Homelander's downfall is tied to a twist involving a backup solution created in case he ever became too unstable.
That story is brutal, shocking, and very comic book in the way it escalates. But the series has already changed too much for that exact ending to happen on screen. The version of Black Noir we have now simply does not put us on that same path. So I really do not think the show is building toward a direct adaptation of Homelander's comic death. But that does not mean the show won't borrow the feeling of it. Because one thing the comics understood is that Homelander's ending has to happen somewhere symbolic, somewhere tied to power, somewhere that makes the fall feel bigger than just one man dying. And if the series is moving toward Homelander reaching the center of political control, then that gives the show the perfect arena for a final collapse. Not the comic version of the fight, but a TV version built around the one relationship this whole story has always been orbiting, Homelander and Butcher. That is why I still believe the most likely final opponent for Homelander is Butcher. At the heart of The Boys, beyond all the satire, beyond all the chaos, this has always been a story about obsession between two broken men. Everything keeps coming back to them. Becca, Ryan, Vought, revenge, control, hate. If Homelander dies, Butcher being there at the end would feel earned in a way no one else can match. But before we get to the death scenario, we have to talk about V1. Because if Homelander gets his hands on it, the show could go in two completely different directions. The first is the nightmare outcome for everyone else. V1 works. Homelander gets the protection he wants. The fear of death disappears. And with that, any remaining restraint disappears too. If he no longer believes he can be touched, then he stops pretending. He stops negotiating. He stops caring who sees the monster. And that is when he becomes far more dangerous than he has ever been before. But here is why I think that ending still carries a punishment. Even if Homelander wins physically, he still loses emotionally. Because what he has always wanted is not simply obedience. He wants devotion that feels real. He wants to be chosen. He wants to be loved without having to force it. But if he rises to this godlike position through terror, then the only thing left around him is fear. Sister Sage would likely pull away. Ashley would never truly stand beside him. Firecracker may preach his gospel, but even she feels unstable as an ally. In other words, Homelander could gain everything he thinks he wants and still end up in the one place he has always feared most, completely alone. And honestly, that is a very Boys kind of ending. A monster reaches the top of the mountain, only to realize there is no one left there with him. But the second V1 scenario might be even better. What if it backfires? What if the thing Homelander sees as his path to immortality ends up weakening him instead? Or even stripping away what makes him special in the first place? That, to me, is one of the most brutal endings the show could give him. Because Homelander is not just powerful, he is psychologically dependent on power. His abilities are not separate from his identity, they are his identity. The way he sees himself, the way he controls people, the way he justifies everything he does, all of it is built on the fact that he believes he is above everyone else. Remove that, and he is no longer a fallen god. He is just a man forced to face a world that no longer fears him. And I genuinely do not think Homelander could cope with that. A powerless Homelander would be dealing with his greatest nightmare all at once. No admiration, no control, no superiority. No reason for anyone to worship him. That is not just defeat, that is ego death. Now, if the show wants to get to that point without using V1 as the direct cause, then there is another path sitting right there in front of us. Soldier Boy. Because if Homelander crosses a line even Soldier Boy cannot
tolerate, I could absolutely see him turning. He already has no real respect for his son. He sees weakness in him. He sees neediness. He sees someone who talks like a king, but still behaves like a child. So if Homelander becomes too unstable, Soldier Boy switching sides would make a lot of sense. And more importantly, Soldier Boy may be the character who changes the rules of the final battle. If anyone has a chance of taking Homelander off the board without killing him outright, it could be him. Especially if the show wants to make Homelander live through his own collapse. But of course, the simplest ending is still the most likely one in some ways. Homelander dies. And if that happens, I think Butcher has to be the man standing in front of him when it does. Not because Butcher deserves peace, he probably doesn't, but because this story has been dragging both of them toward that confrontation from the very beginning. I can even see the show going for mutual destruction. The kind of ending where neither man truly
wins, because both have become too consumed by hate to survive it. And honestly, that would fit the tone of the series perfectly. So when I look at all the possibilities, this is where I land. I do not think Homelander is getting a victorious ending. The only real question is what form his punishment takes. Death, isolation, or powerlessness. And if you ask me what the darkest ending is, it is not Homelander dying as a monster. It is Homelander living long enough to understand that without power, nobody ever loved him at all. And for someone like him, that may be worse than death. But anyway, those are my biggest theories on how Homelander's story could end in The Boys Season 5. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. What do you think is the more fitting ending? Homelander dies, loses his powers, or wins everything and still ends up alone? I'll catch you in